Is about game theory and the computational social choice. So these days, with increased internet connectivity and the speed, so more people actually prefer to play games like chess, checker, poker, and solitaire. These games are played using a clear set of defined rules. So there was a need to embed algorithms in the machines that allowed machines to play ethically according to predefined rules. This led to onset of game theory. In a multi-agent situation where more than one person is involved in solving a logical problem, so game theory is used to choose from a set of options, knowing that our choice would affect the choices of the opponent and their decision would affect our choices. So, which means that actually in the multi-agent situations, our choice would affect the choices of the opponent and their decision would affect our choices. So, each person's choice uh, would affect the choices of the other opponent. So, yeah, so von Neumann is created for the invention of the game theory, and we can understand the concept of game theory by actually studying the five categories. So, he is also called as the father of the game theory. The first category is the cooperative versus non cooperative games. Cooperative means it's an alliance. So, alliance between the two parties, whereas non cooperative is no cooperation, that is non alliance. So one example, that cooperative game example that is considered as a joint venture. Imagine actually there are two companies, company A and the company B. They can't actually build a semiconductor factory on their own due to the shortage of resources. So what they do is actually they come and form an alliance, and they bind themselves with legally binding contract, and they build a factory and they can actually reap the profits. So it's a joint venture, it's an alliance between those two companies which would result in the profits for those two companies. Whereas a non-cooperative classic example is the prisoner's dilemma. In the prisoner's dilemma, we'll discuss in detail in the next video, that is basically Nash equilibrium, which I'll make it. In the prisoner's dilemma, if there are two prisoners, A and B, if both actually make an alliance and stay silent, so when they stay silent, that would actually result in very least sentence. But what they would do actually, the thing is that actually A will doesn't trust B and then B doesn't trust A. So both actually confess, which results in the maximum sentence. So this is a classic example of non-cooperative where there is no alliance between those two prisoners, which results in the maximum sentence for the two prisoners. So this is the first type of the category of the game theory. The second category of the game theory is basically symmetric versus asymmetric games. Symmetric is basically same goal, whereas asymmetric is different goal. So symmetric means same goal. Actually, strategies may be different. So each person, the strategy might be different, but the goal remains same thing. Whereas this is actually in the asymmetric game, it's a different goal. So symmetric game example, the prisoner's dilemma again. We call this one as symmetric because the rules are the same for both the prisoners. That is, if prisoner A confesses and B stays silent, A gets the exact same reward that B also would get if the roles were reversed. That is, if prisoner B confesses and prisoner A stays silent, then B also would get the same reward. So they face identical strategies and identical payoffs. So A confesses, B stays silent, A also gets the same reward. If B confesses and B stays silent, B also would get the same reward. Okay. So that is one thing. So where the goal remains same thing. Whereas asymmetric game, the classic example is the employer versus employee. Consider a salary negotiation. So where employee wants to negotiate with an employer, there's a conflicting goal here because employer wants to minimize the cost, whereas employee wants to maximize his wage. So this is the goal of employer, whereas maximizing age is the goal of employee, right? So because employer wants to minimize the cost, whereas employee wants to maximize his salary. So These things, the strategies and the goals, they are not interchangeable. So employer versus employee is a classic example for an asymmetric game example. So next, third category is the perfect versus imperfect information games. So in the perfect information games, like what do we have here is chess, right? So all the players can see what moves the other players are making. But in imperfect information game like card game, other players' moves are hidden. That's what I give an example here. The perfect information example, that is chess. So at any point in chess match, looking at the board tells you the entire history of the game. You know exactly where every piece is and whose turn it is. So there are no secrets in this one. In the case of chess, you can observe everything that one. That's what is called as a perfect game. Whereas imperfect information means the information is imperfect. In the case of poker, it's a card game where you do not know your opponent's cards, right? Because they are hidden. Here in the case, the cards are hidden. So you must make decisions based on probability and psychology, that is bluffing, rather than certain knowledge. In this case, actually, the information is not hidden. In a sense, you know, you can see, observe everything. Whereas in this case, actually, in the imperfect information, that is in the case of poker example, it's based on probability and the psychology. You just actually make the decisions and you know the cards. So that's why it is called as imperfect information games. Whereas perfect information, classic example is chess. So next one is simultaneous for the sequential games. So simultaneous means the multiple players can take actions concurrently. So multiple players can take actions concurrently. Sequential game, like a board game, each player is aware of others' previous actions. For example, again discussed here. So in simultaneous example, rock on paper scissors. It's a classic example where both players throw their hands signs at the exact same moment. So neither player knows what the other has chosen until the move is already made. So in the rock paper scissors, both actually make their hand signs at the exact same moment. Neither of them know. Neither of them doesn't know. So neither of them knows what the other has chosen or what the other person is going to throw his hand. Whereas in sequential game example is tic tac toe. So in this one, one player actually makes us player X places a mark, player O sees that mark and then decides where to place theirs. So the game flows in turns and the later players have knowledge of earlier actions. So whenever actually someone plays X, another person knows actually in this, let me write it. For example, one place the other person can actually place the O with here, anywhere he can place it, right? So that actually he knows based on the knowledge of the earlier actions. The second person he can actually play. When he plays, next person knows where he can place it. So that's how it just flows sequentially. That's why we call this one as a classic example of sequential game. Next one is zero sum versus non-zero sum games. So in a zero sum games, one player gains something that causes a loss to other players. But in a non-zero sum game, all player gets the advantage other player gains. So zero sum classic example means any sport. One example that I considered is like not a sport but a general example. One cutting a cake. If you have one cake, then you take a larger slice, then well, if you take a larger slice, the remaining slice is only available for everyone else. So you can actually decide the amount gained by them is exactly equal to the amount lost by the losers. So one person, if he wins, if 60 percentage you take it, rest the other person takes 40 percentage. One person takes 80 percentage, other can take 20 percentage of the cake. Even if for example sports in the football, there is always a zero sum game. If one person goes, either one person wins the trophy or another person doesn't win the trophy. So it's always, all the sports are zero sum games. One is winner, another one is loser. Whereas a non zero sum game example is international trade. One is actually if country A, for example, country A is great in making wine. Another country B is great at making wool. So what, it doesn't know how to make wine, it doesn't know how to make wool. So both actually can trade. So that actually country A, it gets wool from the country B because it gets wool at the cheaper. Why? Because country B gets wine from the country A. So that actually both parties actually end up richer than they were before, right? Because they don't know how to make wine, they don't know how to make, country A doesn't know how to make wool, and country B doesn't know how to make wine. So both actually exchange, both actually trade wine and the wool among themselves, so that actually the total benefit increases. So it's a kind of win-win situation for both the countries A and B. So this is about so this is it. So this is about like five categories of the game theory. I hope all of you guys understood from this one. Thank you.